Rescuers couldn't believe their eyes. A golden retriever, scarred and starving, clung desperately to a tiny, shivering kitten, refusing to let go. No matter what anyone did, the dog wrapped tighter, as if guarding a secret. At first, it seemed like simple kindness, but soon people realized there was something haunting behind those eyes. What was the dog remembering? What was it protecting the kitten from? And when the truth is finally uncovered, it's a story that will break your heart and change everything you thought you knew about survival and love. Your comments and presence here remind me why I tell these stories. If you still believe in the healing strength of love, truth, and quiet courage, then you're the reason this channel exists. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the abandoned parking lot as animal control officers Maria Chen and Derek Walsh responded to yet another routine call. A concerned citizen had reported a stray dog lurking behind the old shopping center, though such calls rarely yielded surprises after their combined 20 years on the job. "Over there, by the dumpsters," Maria pointed, her flashlight beam cutting through the growing dusk. The golden retriever's fur gleamed dully as the light swept over its huddled form. The dog was curled tightly into a ball, pressed against the brick wall. Derek approached slowly, his boots crunching on scattered gravel. "Hey there, buddy," he called softly, keeping his voice gentle and even. The retriever's head lifted, revealing anxious brown eyes. Its tail gave a slight wag, but the dog remained firmly in place. "Looks healthy enough," Maria observed, noting the dog's clean coat and good weight. "Probably someone's pet that got loose." She reached for the catch pole secured to her belt, but Derek held up his hand. "Wait," he said, frowning as he crept closer. "Something's not right. Look how it's positioned." The dog had shifted slightly, curling its body even more tightly around something they couldn't quite see. Maria moved her flashlight beam lower and both officers froze. Nestled against the retriever's warm belly was a tiny kitten, no more than a few weeks old. The gray tabby was so small it nearly disappeared in the dog's protective embrace. "Well, that's definitely a first," Maria said softly, exchanging a surprised look with her partner. In all their years of animal rescue, neither had seen anything quite like this. A dog so fiercely guarding a kitten. Derek crouched down, still keeping a careful distance. "Come on, boy. Let's get you both somewhere safe." He reached into his pocket for a treat, holding it out invitingly. The retriever's nose twitched with interest, but when Derek extended his hand further, the dog whined and shuffled backward. Pressing itself more firmly against the wall, its body curved even more protectively around the kitten. Poor thing's terrified we'll separate them, Maria realized, watching the dog's anxious behavior. She knelt down beside Derek, studying the unusual pair. The kitten seemed perfectly content, snuggled trustingly against its unlikely guardian. They tried several more times to coax the dog forward, but each attempt only caused the retriever to become more distressed. When Maria finally managed to slip a gentle hand toward the kitten, the dog released a low, worried whimper that tugged at their hearts. "This isn't normal protective behavior," Derek said, running a hand through his graying hair. "I mean, sure, we've seen dogs be gentle with cats before, but this is something else entirely." Maria nodded slowly, watching how the retriever kept readjusting its position to keep the kitten safely shielded. "It's like he thinks he's the kitten's parent or something. Look at how he keeps checking on it." Sure enough, the dog would periodically nose the tiny kitten, as if ensuring it was still there and safe. The kitten would respond each time with a squeaky meow, batting playfully at the retriever's muzzle with tiny paws. "We need to get them both to the shelter before it gets dark," Maria said finally, checking her watch. "But we can't stress them out more by forcing them apart." Derek thought for a moment, then headed back to their van. He returned with a large transport crate, the kind usually reserved for bigger dogs. "Maybe if we can get them to go in together." They worked slowly and patiently, placing treats in a trail leading to the crate's open door. The retriever watched their every move with anxious attention, but the smell of food was tempting. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes of gentle coaxing, the dog carefully stood up, keeping the kitten corralled between its legs. "That's it. Nice and easy," Maria encouraged as the retriever inched forward, shepherding the tottering kitten along. The tiny cat seemed unfazed by the movement, staying close to its protector's warm fur. In a moment that left both officers holding their breath, the dog finally entered the crate, but not before gently picking up the kitten by the scruff of its neck and carrying it inside. Once in the crate, the retriever immediately resumed its protective curled position, tucking the kitten close. "Unbelievable," Derek whispered as they secured the crate door. "In 15 years, I've never seen anything like this. There's got to be more to their story." Maria nodded, watching through the crate's bars as the retriever tenderly nuzzled the sleepy kitten. "Whatever happened to bring these two together, that dog is not letting this little one out of its sight." They carefully loaded the crate into their van, making sure to secure it where the dog could still see them. The retriever's eyes remained alert, but seemed calmer now that it was clear the kitten would be staying with him. The folks at the shelter aren't going to believe this one, Maria said as she climbed into the driver's seat. She glanced back at their unusual rescue, where the golden retriever had already settled into its now familiar protective curl around its tiny companion. Derek shook his head, still amazed by what they'd witnessed. "Something tells me this is more than just a random stray looking after an abandoned kitten. That dog's devotion goes way deeper than simple kindness." As they pulled away from the parking lot, both officers couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just stumbled upon the beginning of an extraordinary story, one that would take more than a routine rescue to fully understand. The fluorescent lights of the Valley Grove Animal Shelter hummed overhead as Eliza Rourke observed the newest arrivals through the glass partition. The golden retriever hadn't moved from its protective position around the kitten since being settled into their temporary housing an hour ago. "They've been exactly like this since the rescue team brought them in," Sarah, one of the junior volunteers, explained. She held a clipboard against her chest, concern evident in her voice. "The dog won't even touch the food we left." Eliza watched as another volunteer approached the enclosure with a fresh bowl of water. The retriever's head snapped up immediately, muscles tensing. A low, worried whine filled the air until the volunteer backed away. "Has anyone been able to examine either of them?" Eliza asked, making notes in her behavioral observation log. "Not properly," Sarah replied. "Dr. Martinez tried to approach with a stethoscope, but the dog became so agitated we had to stop. The strange thing is, he's not aggressive, just desperate to keep the kitten close." Through the glass, Eliza could see the golden retriever, periodically checking the kitten, nudging it gently with its nose. The kitten, appearing to be about 4 weeks old, seemed completely at ease, purring and pawing playfully at its protector's face. "Look at that," Eliza murmured, pointing to how the dog repositioned itself when the kitten started to wobble toward the edge of their bedding. "That's not just protective behavior, that's trauma-based hypervigilance." More staff members gathered around as Eliza continued her observation. The retriever's behavior was becoming the talk of the shelter. Every attempted approach resulted in the same pattern: intense anxiety, protective positioning, and clear signs of emotional distress if anyone got too close to the kitten. "I've worked with bonded pairs before," Mark, a senior handler, commented. "But this is different. It's like the dog is convinced something terrible will happen if it lets its guard down for even a moment." Eliza nodded, her trained eye catching subtle details others might miss. The way the retriever's eyes constantly scanned the room, how it positioned itself between the kitten and the door, the slight trembling in its muscles whenever someone walked past. "We need to try something different," Eliza announced, straightening up from her observation position. "This isn't just about physical health anymore. There's significant psychological distress here." She gathered the staff for a quick meeting away from the enclosure. "First, we need to make their environment feel as safe as possible. Remove any unnecessary foot traffic from this corridor. Keep the lighting low during quiet hours, and absolutely no attempts to separate them unless it's a medical emergency. The team nodded, already taking notes. Eliza continued, I want to start building trust gradually. The same two people should handle all feeding and cleaning, no rotating staff. We need to establish predictability. What about medical examinations? Dr. Martinez asked. They both need to be checked over properly. We'll work up to that, Eliza assured him. For now, let's focus on helping them feel secure. I've seen this kind of behavior before in animals who've experienced severe trauma. Whatever these two have been through, it's left deep emotional scars. As the day progressed, Eliza remained close to the enclosure, carefully documenting every interaction. She noticed how the retriever would only drift into brief moments of sleep when the corridor was completely quiet, and even then, any small sound would snap it back to alertness. The kitten, meanwhile, displayed complete trust in its canine guardian. It nursed from the bowl of kitten formula they'd provided, but only when the retriever first sniffed it thoroughly and stood watch. The dog's dedication was absolute, extending beyond mere animal companionship. There's something we're missing, Eliza said quietly to herself, reviewing her notes. The intensity of the dog's fixation, the specific nature of its protective behaviors. These weren't random. They told a story, one that needed to be understood if they were going to help either animal heal. By evening, Eliza had developed a preliminary plan for working with the unusual pair. She watched as the night shift staff quietly prepared for handover, the retriever tracking their movements with unwavering attention. I'll be back first thing tomorrow, she told Sarah, who was finishing her shift. Make sure everyone follows the new protocols tonight. These two need consistency and calm more than anything else right now. As Eliza gathered her things to leave, she took one final look through the glass. The retriever had curled itself around the sleeping kitten, creating a living barrier between the tiny creature and the rest of the world. In that moment, Eliza made a silent promise to both of them. She would uncover the truth behind their bond, no matter how long it took. The dog's eyes met hers through the glass, and Eliza saw something there that strengthened her resolve. Behind the fear and protective instinct, there was intelligence and a depth of emotion that spoke of experiences yet to be understood. As morning light filtered through the shelter windows, Eliza arrived early, determined to conduct a more thorough examination of the golden retriever. She'd spent a restless night thinking about the dog's unusual behavior, and her professional instincts told her there was more to uncover. Good morning, you two, she said softly, approaching the enclosure. The retriever's ears perked up, but its body remained protectively curved around the sleeping kitten. Eliza noticed how the dog's muscles tensed slightly, ready to move if necessary. She sat down on the floor nearby, maintaining a non-threatening distance. Opening her notebook, she began taking detailed notes about the dog's physical condition. The retriever's coat, though golden, showed patches where it had grown back unevenly. That alone suggested past neglect. As she observed more closely, other details emerged. There were distinct scars on the dog's front legs, thin white lines, that spoke of old injuries. They weren't the kind of marks that came from accidental scratches or playful roughhousing. These were deliberate. What happened to you? Eliza whispered, her heart aching at the discovery. When Sarah, one of the morning staff members, dropped a metal food bowl in the next room, the sharp clang echoed through the corridor. The retriever's reaction was immediate and severe. A full-body flinch, followed by a low, anxious whine. The dog's paw instinctively moved to pull the kitten closer. Classic trauma response, Eliza noted in her book, underlining the observation twice. She'd seen similar reactions in other abused animals, but something about this case felt different, more complex. During the morning feeding, Eliza noticed another telling detail. When the retriever finally felt secure enough to eat, she could see a chipped tooth. the kind of damage that often came from desperate attempts to chew through metal or hard surfaces. "Sarah," Eliza called quietly to her colleague, "can you pull up all the local abandonment reports from the past 6 months? I want to review them." While the retriever dozed fitfully, still maintaining its protective position, Eliza pored over the reports at the shelter's front desk. Most were standard cases: pets left at doorsteps, animals found wandering streets. But one report caught her attention. Local farmer reports multiple animals found abandoned in old Peterson barn. She read aloud softly. Location: edge of town, off Route 7. Multiple deceased animals discovered after winter thaw. The report included photographs that made her stomach turn. The barn had been used as a dumping ground for unwanted animals during the harsh winter months. The thought of animals being left there to face the cold alone filled her with anger and determination. "The timing matches," she murmured, checking dates against the retriever's estimated age and condition. The barn incident had occurred 3 months ago, during the worst of the winter storms. Eliza glanced back at the enclosure, where the retriever was gently grooming the kitten. The dog's protective behavior took on new meaning. Had they both been abandoned there? Had the retriever already endured the trauma of watching other animals suffer and die in that barn? The physical evidence aligned with her theory. The scars could have come from attempting to escape the barn or from conflicts with other desperate animals. The chipped tooth might have resulted from trying to break free or access food during imprisonment. She began documenting her findings, creating a timeline of possible events. The retriever's extreme attachment to the kitten made more sense in this context. If they had survived together in that barn, it would explain the depth of their bond and the dog's intense fear of separation. "I think we've found our first real lead," Eliza told Sarah, showing her the report. "These injuries and behaviors, they tell a story that matches what happened at that barn. We need to investigate this further." The pieces were starting to come together, forming a picture that was both heartbreaking and crucial to understanding how to help these survivors heal. Eliza knew that uncovering the truth about their past was just the beginning, but it was an essential first step in their recovery. She returned to the enclosure, sitting quietly near the glass. The retriever met her gaze, and Eliza saw something she hadn't noticed before. Beneath the fear and protective instinct, there was a glimmer of hope, a willingness to trust that hadn't been completely destroyed by whatever horrors they had endured. "We're going to figure this out," she promised softly, watching as the retriever gentle nudged the sleeping kitten. "And we're going to make sure nothing like that ever happens to you again." The early morning sun cast long shadows across the dirt road as Eliza's car bumped along the path toward the old Peterson barn. She had waited until daybreak to make this visit, wanting clear light to examine the site. The location was exactly as described in the report: isolated, set back from Route 7, and surrounded by overgrown fields that had long since been abandoned. The barn itself loomed ahead, its weathered wood dark against the pale sky. Paint peeled from the sides in long strips, and several roof shingles had worked loose during winter storms. Eliza parked her car and sat for a moment, steeling herself for what she might find. As she approached the large sliding door, the musty smell of old hay and decay made her wrinkle her nose. The door protested with a loud creak as she pulled it open, sending a few startled birds fluttering up to the rafters. Eliza pulled out her flashlight, though morning light streamed through gaps in the walls and roof. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, her voice echoing in the empty space. The barn's interior told a story of suffering. Old blankets and torn pieces of cardboard were scattered across the dirt floor, makeshift beds where abandoned animals had tried to find warmth. In one corner, she found a pile of matted golden fur, confirming her suspicions about the retriever's presence here. Eliza moved closer to examine the wooden walls. Deep scratch marks scored the lumber at various heights. Some were clearly from larger animals, desperate attempts to escape. Her fingers traced one particularly deep set of grooves. "This matches the scarring pattern on the retriever's legs," she noted aloud, taking photos with her phone to document the evidence. A sound from outside made her turn quickly. It was just a branch scraping against the roof, but the eerie atmosphere had her on edge. She continued her investigation, moving deeper into the barn. Near the back wall, something caught her eye. A small cardboard box, partially collapsed, lay on its side. Beside it were tiny scratch marks in the dirt, the kind that could only have been made by a kitten's claws. Eliza's heart began to race as she remembered the report about the kittens. "Rescue." She pulled out her phone and dialed the shelter's number. Sarah answered on the second ring. "Sarah, I need you to check something for me," Eliza said, her voice urgent. "The report about the kitten. Where exactly was it found?" There was a rustling of papers on the other end. "Let me see. Here it is. The kitten was discovered 3 weeks ago in the old Peterson barn off Route 7. It was barely alive when they brought it in." "Why?" Eliza's hand trembled slightly as she took another photo. "Because I'm standing in that exact spot right now. Sarah, both of them, the retriever and the kitten, they were abandoned here. Different times, same place." "Are you sure?" Sarah asked. "Positive. There's evidence everywhere. The golden fur, scratch marks that match the retriever's injuries. And back here, where they found the kitten." Eliza's voice trailed off as the full impact of the connection hit her. "This explains everything. The retriever's fierce protective instinct, its refusal to leave the kitten's side, it wasn't just random kindness. The dog recognized something in that tiny kitten, something deeply familiar. The same fear, the same abandonment, the same struggle to survive in this cold, dark place." Eliza walked slowly through the barn, documenting everything she could find. Each piece of evidence built upon the last, creating a timeline of events. The retriever must have been abandoned during the winter months and during the worst of the cold. Then, weeks after its rescue, the kitten had been discarded in the same place. "It's like the retriever knows," Eliza said to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. "It understands exactly what the kitten went through because it lived the same nightmare." She found more signs of the animal's ordeal: a broken water dish crusted with ice, tattered pieces of newspaper, and various items that suggested multiple animals had been abandoned here over time. The barn had become a dumping ground for unwanted pets, its isolation making it a convenient spot for those who couldn't be bothered to properly surrender their animals. The morning light had grown stronger, filling more of the barn's interior. Eliza stood in the center, turning slowly to take in the full scope of what she had discovered. The shared trauma of these two survivors went beyond coincidence. Their bond wasn't just instinct, it was recognition, empathy, and a determination that neither would have to face such abandonment again. As she prepared to leave, Eliza took one final look at the barn. The evidence she had gathered would help build a case for increased patrols in the area, perhaps even cameras to catch those who might use this place again. But more importantly, it helped her understand the depth of what these animals had endured and why their connection was so profound. The drive back to the shelter felt different than the journey out. What had been theory was now certainty. The mystery of why the retriever refused to leave the kitten's side had transformed into a story of survival, recognition, and healing. Two souls, abandoned in the same dark place, now finding light in each other's company. Eliza sat at her desk in the shelter, surrounded by stacks of photos and documents. Her eyes burned from staring at her computer screen, but determination kept her going. She had spent hours organizing the evidence from the barn, each photograph carefully labeled, every observation noted in detail. "We've got you now," she muttered, adding another document to her growing file on Warren Kettleman. The farmer's name had come up repeatedly in her research. The barn sat on the edge of his property, and local gossip painted a clear picture of his attitude toward animals. Former employees spoke of his callousness, though most were too afraid to go on record. She glanced through the window of her office to where the golden retriever lay, curled around the kitten. For the first time since their arrival, the dog's eyes were closed in peaceful sleep. Eliza had noticed this change whenever she worked nearby, as though the retriever somehow understood her mission. Sarah knocked softly on the doorframe. "I brought you some coffee," she said, setting down a steaming mug. "How's it coming?" "I've got enough to warrant an investigation," Eliza replied, shuffling through her papers. "The evidence of neglect is clear. Those claw marks in the barn match perfectly with the retriever's injuries. And I found records of at least 3 other complaints against Kettleman in the past year alone. Speaking of Kettleman," Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper, "he was at the diner this morning, running his mouth as usual." Eliza's hands clenched involuntarily. "What did he say?" "Oh, you know, the usual garbage about how animals are just property, tools to be used and discarded. Someone mentioned the retriever we found, and he just laughed, said any farmer worth his salt knows that keeping useless animals around is bad business." The golden retriever lifted its head, perhaps sensing Eliza's rising anger. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "Well, he won't be laughing when animal control shows up with a warrant." She opened her email and began composing a formal complaint to the county animal control office. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she detailed her findings: the physical evidence at the barn, the documented injuries on the retriever, the pattern of abandonment, and the witness statements she'd gathered. "I've never seen you like this," Sarah observed, leaning against the doorframe. Eliza paused her typing. "Someone has to stand up to people like him. These animals can't defend themselves." As if in agreement, the retriever stood up, carefully, checking that the kitten was secure before padding over to Eliza's desk. The dog rested its head on her lap, those soulful eyes looking up at her with complete trust. Eliza scratched behind its ears, noting how the dog no longer flinched at human touch. "You're safe now," she murmured. "Both of you are." The shelter's front door chimed, and voices carried down the hallway. One in particular made the retriever stiffen. "That's right, I said it!" Warren Kettleman's gruff voice boomed. "All this fuss over some mangy strays. In my day, we didn't waste time with this bleeding heart nonsense." Eliza stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. The retriever pressed against her legs, trembling slightly but standing its ground. She stepped into the hallway to find Kettleman holding court near the front desk, his weather-beaten face twisted in a sneer. "Mr. Kettleman," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Is there something we can help you with?" He turned, taking in her professional attire with obvious disdain. "So you're the one stirring up trouble, poking around my property, spreading lies about animal abuse." "I'm investigating multiple reports of neglect and abandonment," Eliza replied. "The evidence speaks for itself." Kettleman barked out a laugh. "Evidence? Let me tell you something about farm life, little lady. Animals serve a purpose. When they stop being useful, you get rid of them. Simple as that. By leaving them to freeze to death in an abandoned barn. My land, my business," he sneered. "You city folks come out here with your fancy degrees and your soft hearts, thinking you know better than those of us who've worked the land our whole lives." The retriever growled softly, and Kettleman's eyes darted down. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or guilt, before his arrogant mask slipped back into place. "That mutt looks familiar," he said. "Probably another worthless runaway. Should have been put down months ago." Eliza stepped forward, placing herself between Kettleman and the dog. "I've just submitted a formal complaint to County Animal Control. They'll be investigating all recent abandonments in your barn, Mr. Kettleman. I suggest you get a lawyer." "Threats now, is it?" He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You have no idea what you're getting into, girl. This is farm country. We take care of our own problems out here." "Is that a threat, Mr. Kettleman?" Eliza met his gaze steadily. "Because I'd be happy to add witness intimidation to the complaint." He straightened up, adjusting his cap with deliberate slowness. "We'll see who comes out on top here. People round these parts know me. Know my family's been here for generations. Who are they gonna believe? Some outsider trying to tell us how to live, or one of their own?" With that, he turned and stalked out, letting the door slam behind him. The retriever's trembling gradually subsided, but it stayed pressed against Eliza's legs, as though drawing strength from her presence. Sarah appeared with the kitten in her arms. "Well, that was intense. That was necessary," Eliza replied, reaching down to comfort the retriever. He needed to know that his actions have consequences, that someone is finally paying attention. She returned to her office, more determined than ever. The confrontation had only strengthened her resolve. Warren Kettleman had shown his true colors, publicly confirming everything she suspected about his character and his treatment of animals. The retriever settled back into its spot near her desk. The kitten soon tucked safely against its side. Both animals seemed to relax as Eliza resumed her work, building the case that would bring their abuser to justice. The shelter's quiet night routine shattered with the sound of breaking glass. Eliza bolted upright in her small office, where she'd been catching up on paperwork. The retriever, who often stayed late with her along with its inseparable kitten companion, lifted its head and growled. "Stay here," she whispered, reaching for her phone. But before she could dial, more crashes echoed through the building, followed by the terrified chorus of barking dogs and frightened cats. Eliza's heart pounded as she crept toward her office door. The retriever stood, positioning itself between the kitten and the potential threat. The hallway lights flickered. Shadows moved near the kennels. "Hey!" a familiar voice shouted from outside. Jonas Myrick, who lived in the caretaker's cottage behind the shelter, was already responding to the commotion. "What's going on in there?" The shadows scattered. Footsteps pounded toward the back exit. Eliza rushed to check on the animals, flipping on every light switch she passed. The scene that greeted her made her gasp. Shredded bedding littered the floor. Food bags had been slashed open, their contents scattered. Water bowls were overturned, leaving puddles everywhere, but worst of all were the cages. Someone had rattled them violently, terrorizing the animals inside. Dogs cowered in corners, cats hissed from their highest perches, and the newer rescues trembled uncontrollably. "Eliza!" Jonas burst through the front door, still pulling on his jacket. "Are you okay? I saw someone running toward the old access road, but it was too dark to make out who—" He stopped short, taking in the destruction. "Call the police," Eliza said, her voice shaking with anger. She knelt to comfort a terrified puppy. "And then, help me check everyone. We need to make sure no one's hurt." Jonas pulled out his phone while Eliza moved from cage to cage, speaking softly to each frightened animal. The retriever had followed her, the kitten close behind, as though offering moral support. "Police are on their way," Jonas reported, joining her inspection. "This wasn't random, was it?" Eliza shook her head. "Warren Kettleman made his threats pretty clear earlier. This is exactly his style. Terrorize those who can't fight back." "We should have installed those security cameras last month," Jonas muttered, helping her right an overturned crate. "We couldn't afford them then." Eliza's jaw tightened. "But we'll find a way now. I won't let him get away with this." They worked steadily, restoring order and calming the animals. When the police arrived, they took photos and gathered evidence, but their expressions suggested little hope of prosecution without clear proof. "Ma'am," one officer said gently, "are you sure you want to pursue this? Sometimes these situations can escalate if pushed too hard." Eliza stood her ground. "That's exactly what he wants, for us to back down. But if we do, who speaks for them?" She gestured to the cages around them. "Who protects them from people who think animals are disposable? The retriever pressed against her legs, as it often did when sensing her distress. The kitten mewed softly from its perch on a nearby counter, where it had been watching the proceedings with wide eyes. After the police left, Jonas helped Eliza finish cleaning up. "You know," he said carefully, "the officer wasn't entirely wrong. Warren's got a mean streak and he's got friends in high places." "I know." Eliza paused in her sweeping. "But look at these two." She nodded toward the retriever and kitten. "They survived his cruelty once. They found each other despite everything he did. If they can be that brave, how can I be anything less?" Jonas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right then. But you're not doing this alone. First thing tomorrow, I'm installing temporary cameras from my hunting gear. They're not fancy, but they'll record anyone who tries this again." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," he cut her off firmly. "Because you're right. Someone has to stand up for them. Might as well be us." As they finished securing the shelter for what remained of the night, Eliza felt a strange mix of anger and determination. The vandalism had shaken her, but it had also strengthened her resolve. Warren's attempt to frighten her had only proved how desperately these animals needed protection from people like him. The retriever and kitten settled into their usual corner of her office as she gathered her things to leave. Their unwavering bond, maintained even through tonight's chaos, reminded her exactly what she was fighting for. These animals deserved better than fear and abuse. They deserved justice. "Come on," she told Jonas, switching off the lights. "We've got work to do tomorrow." Eliza's fingers trembled as she sorted through the dusty files in the county records office. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on decades of paperwork. She'd been here for hours, following a tip from an old-timer at the local feed store who remembered Warren Kettleman's working dogs. "These should be the livestock registration records from 5 years ago," the clerk said, dropping another box on the table. "Though I'm not sure what you expect to find." "I'll know it when I see it," Eliza replied, not looking up from her current stack. Her persistence paid off 20 minutes later. There, in faded ink, was a breeding license for a golden retriever. The photo attached showed a younger, healthier version of the dog now in her care. The registration listed Warren Kettleman as the owner. "Got you," she whispered, pulling out her phone to take pictures. The paperwork told a story she hadn't expected. The retriever had been registered as a property guardian, protecting Warren's farm from intruders and predators. There were vet records, too. Regular checkups until 3 years ago, when an injury was documented. A broken leg from an accident with farm equipment. After that, nothing. The dog had simply disappeared from the records. Eliza's stomach churned. She knew what happened to working dogs that couldn't work anymore. Warren had made his views crystal clear. Animals were tools, nothing more. But there had to be more. She dug deeper into recent files, looking for any mention of cats or kittens. A report from Animal Control caught her eye. 6 months ago, someone had complained about a cat giving birth in Warren's barn. His response was documented in stark bureaucratic language. "Owner states mother cat is feral, refuses responsibility for litter." The dates aligned perfectly. The kitten they'd rescued would have been from that litter. "Ms. Rourke?" The clerk appeared again. "I found something else you might want to see. It was filed under nuisance complaints." The new document was a neighbor's statement about hearing animals in distress at Warren's property. The witness described seeing Warren carrying an injured dog toward his truck, cursing about useless mutts. The date matched the retriever's last vet visit. Eliza sat back, her mind racing to connect the pieces. The retriever hadn't just been abandoned. It had been deliberately discarded after years of loyal service. And months later, Warren had done the same thing to an entire litter of kittens, leaving them to die in the same cold barn. She pulled up a photo on her phone, the retriever and kitten at the shelter, curled together as always. Now their bond made perfect sense. They weren't just two random strays who found comfort in each other. They were survivors of the same man's cruelty, abandoned in the same place, The retriever must have recognized something in the kitten. The same fear, the same pain, maybe even the same smell of the barn where they'd both been left to die. "Oh, God," Eliza whispered, blinking back tears. The dog wasn't just protecting the kitten out of kindness. It was trying to save it from the fate it had barely escaped itself. She gathered the documents with shaking hands, making copies of everything. This was more than evidence of neglect. It was proof of a pattern. Warren hadn't just abandoned animals, he'd turned his barn into a dumping ground for any creature he deemed worthless. The clerk watched her with concern. "Found what you were looking for?" "More than I expected." Eliza carefully organized the copies into her folder. "Thank you for your help." Outside, she sat in her car for several long minutes, processing what she'd learned. The truth felt like a weight in her chest. She'd known Warren was cruel, but this was calculated, deliberate. He'd thrown away faithful animals like garbage, never expecting them to survive, never expecting anyone to care enough to investigate, but they had survived. Against all odds, the retriever had escaped that barn. And months later, when it heard a tiny kitten crying in the same dark place, it had refused to let history repeat itself. Her phone buzzed, a text from Jonas at the shelter. The retriever was refusing food again, anxious about being separated. From the kitten during routine vet checks. "On my way," she typed back, starting her car. Now she understood their inseparable bond all too well. They weren't just companions. They were living proof of Warren's callousness and of the extraordinary resilience of animals who refused to let cruelty steal their capacity for love. The revelation strengthened her resolve. Warren hadn't expected anyone to connect the dots, to see the pattern in his actions. He'd counted on people's indifference, on the disposable nature he assigned to animals who no longer served his purposes. But he'd underestimated two things: the bond between his discarded survivors and Eliza's determination to expose the truth. As she drove back to the shelter, she began mentally composing her report to animal control. This time, she had more than suspicions. She had proof. The retriever and kitten weren't just an odd pair who'd found each other by chance. They were living evidence of Warren's systematic cruelty, and their unshakable bond was the strongest testimony against him. Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she spread the documents across Sheriff Martinez's desk. "Here's everything we've found. Medical records, witness statements, photographic evidence, all pointing to systematic animal abuse at Warren Kettleman's property." The sheriff leaned forward, examining the timeline Eliza had carefully constructed. "And you're certain these animals came from his barn?" "Absolutely certain." Eliza pointed to the dates, the locations, the matching descriptions. The golden retriever was his guard dog for years before being abandoned. The kitten came from a litter he left to die in the same place. It's all here. Jonas stood behind her, arms crossed. "We've got more than enough for a warrant now, Sheriff." "I agree." Martinez nodded slowly. "But building a case takes time. We need to do this by the book." "Those animals don't have time," Eliza insisted. "There could be more trapped in that barn right now." The sheriff held up a hand. "I understand your urgency, Ms. Rourke. I'll expedite the paperwork, but don't do anything rash." But Eliza couldn't wait. As soon as they left the station, she turned to Jonas. "We need to document that barn before Warren realizes we're onto him. Will you help me?" Jonas ran a hand through his sandy hair. "You know this is risky, right?" "Everything about this case is risky." She touched his arm. "But I need backup, can trust." They drove separately to the abandoned barn, parking their vehicles behind a stand of trees. The structure looked even more decrepit in the fading afternoon light. Weathered boards sagging, roof listing dangerously to one side. Armed, with cameras and flashlights, they carefully approached the entrance. The musty smell of rotting hay and something darker, more ominous, filled their nostrils. "Look." Jonas pointed to fresh tire tracks in the mud. Someone's been here recently. Eliza was photographing claw marks on the door frame when they heard the rumble of an approaching truck. Before they could react, headlights swept across the barn's facade, and Warren Kettleman's battered pickup skidded to a stop, blocking their vehicles. "Well, well." Warren's voice was eerily calm as he emerged, silhouetted against the dying sun. "Trespassing now, are we?" Eliza's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "We have evidence, Warren. All of it. The retriever, the kitten, everything. You did hear." "Evidence?" He laughed harshly, moving closer. "You mean my property? Where you're standing without permission?" Jonas stepped forward. "Back off, Warren. The sheriff knows we're here." "Does she now?" Warren's eyes glittered with malice. In one fluid motion, he slammed the barn door shut behind them, the ancient wood groaning in protest. "Then let's make sure you have something interesting to report." Before either could move, Warren produced a gas can from his truck. The sharp smell of accelerant filled the air as he splashed it across the barn's entrance. "You're insane!" Jonas lunged forward, but Warren had already struck a match. The flame caught with frightening speed, racing along the fuel trail and up the dry wooden walls. Smoke began to fill the confined space as Warren's boots crunched away across the gravel. "Jonas!" Eliza coughed, squinting through the thickening air. "The back door!" They stumbled toward the rear of the barn, but the ancient structure was already groaning ominously. A burning beam crashed down inches from where they stood, sending sparks flying. "It's blocked!" Jonas shouted, shouldering against the warped wood. "The whole frame shifted!" Eliza pulled her shirt over her nose, trying to think through the rising panic. The smoke was getting thicker, the heat more intense. Above them, the roof timbers crackled and popped. Through the chaos, she heard Warren's truck roaring away, leaving them trapped in the inferno he'd created. The evidence he was so desperate to destroy would burn with them, along with any chance of justice for the animals they'd fought to protect. Another beam gave way with a thunderous crack, and Eliza felt Jonas pull her back just in time. They were running out of options and oxygen. The barn was becoming their tomb, just as it had nearly been for so many abandoned animals before them. Through the choking smoke and growing flames, Eliza realized with horrible clarity, Warren hadn't just wanted to stop their investigation. He wanted to eliminate any witnesses to his cruelty permanently. The smoke grew thicker with each passing second, turning the air into a suffocating blanket. Eliza pressed herself against the ground where the air was clearest, her eyes burning as she tried to make out any escape route through the inferno. Jonas lay beside her, coughing violently. "We need to find another way out," she choked out between gasps. The heat was becoming unbearable. Above them, the ancient timbers groaned and shifted, raining down burning splinters. The fire had spread to every wall now, creating a terrifying cage of flames. Eliza's throat felt like it was closing up, and her vision started to blur at the edges. A thunderous crack split the air as another beam gave way, crashing down mere feet from where they huddled. Jonas grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the falling debris. "Eliza, we can't stay here!" Through the roar of the flames, a new sound cut through, a familiar bark, followed by an urgent whine. Eliza's heart leaped. "That's impossible," she whispered. But there, emerging through the smoke like a ghost, was the golden retriever. The kitten clung to its back, tiny claws gripping the thick fur. The dog's eyes reflected the dancing flames, but they were focused and determined. "How did they—" Jonas started, but was cut off by another fit of coughing. The retriever barked again, more insistently this time, and began moving along the barn's inner wall. It stopped, looking back at them expectantly. Eliza understood. It was showing them the way. Follow the dog," she managed to say, tugging Jonas's sleeve. They crawled after the retriever as it led them through the burning maze. The dog seemed to know exactly where it was going, avoiding weakened floorboards and staying clear of the worst of the flames. The kitten remained steady on its back, ears flat against its head but maintaining its grip. The retriever stopped at what appeared to be a solid wall, but as Eliza squinted through the smoke, she could make out a gap where the boards had rotted away at the bottom, just large enough for a person to squeeze through if they stayed low. The dog nudged the loose boards with its nose, creating a wider opening. It went through first, ensuring the kitten stayed safely on its back, then turned to watch them follow. "You go first," Jonas wheezed, pushing Eliza toward the gap. She didn't argue, dropping to her stomach and wiggling through the narrow space. Sharp edges caught at her clothes, but she kept moving. The fresh air hitting her face was like a shock of cold water. Jonas followed right behind her, and they stumbled away from the burning building. The retriever and kitten were already several yards ahead, waiting for them to catch up. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder by the second. Red and blue lights appeared on the horizon as police cars and fire trucks raced down the dirt road. Through tear-filled eyes, Eliza saw Warren's truck trying to speed away from the scene, but the sheriff's vehicle cut him off, forcing him onto the shoulder. 2 deputies jumped out, weapons drawn. "Warren Kettleman, hands where we can see them!" Warren had no choice but to comply. As the officers cuffed him, Sheriff Martinez strode over to where Eliza and Jonas sat catching their breath, the retriever and kitten close beside them. "We got an anonymous tip about suspicious activity at the barn," Martinez explained, kneeling beside them. "Looks like we got here just in time." Eliza reached out to stroke the retriever's head, noticing how the dog kept the kitten protectively close. "They saved our lives," she said hoarsely. They knew exactly what to do. The golden retriever pressed against her side, its steady presence, a comfort as the firefighters began battling the blaze. The kitten had moved from the dog's back to its usual spot, curled in the protective circle of the retriever's body. In the days following the barn fire, the small town's courthouse buzzed with activity. Warren Kettleman sat stone-faced at the defendant's table as evidence mounted against him. Photographs of the barn's interior, veterinary records, and witness testimonies painted a clear picture of his years of cruelty. Eliza sat in the front row, her testimony having carried significant weight. The golden retriever's scars and the kitten's malnourished condition when found spoke volumes. The prosecutor presented a damning timeline of Warren's pattern of animal abandonment, connecting dozens of cases to his property. "Your Honor," the prosecutor concluded, "Mr. Kettleman's actions show a calculated pattern of abuse and neglect spanning years. We ask for the maximum penalty under our state's animal cruelty statutes." The judge's gavel came down with finality. Warren was sentenced to jail time and hefty fines, banned from ever owning animals again. As the deputies led him away, his weathered face finally showed emotion, not remorse, but anger at being held accountable at last. But the true healing began in Eliza's home. She had converted her sunny spare room into a peaceful sanctuary for the pair. The golden retriever, now named Hope, had a plush bed big enough for 2, though the kitten, christened Faith, preferred sleeping curled against Hope's chest. The change in both animals was remarkable. Hope's anxious pacing gradually ceased, replaced by contented sighs as she sprawled on the living room rug. Her eyes, once wary, now held a gentle brightness. Faith grew from a trembling scrap of fur into a playful ball of energy, though she never strayed far from Hope's watchful gaze. "Look, at you too," Eliza said softly one evening, watching them share dinner from adjacent bowls. Where once Hope would have guarded her food fearfully, she now ate calmly, occasionally pausing to check on Faith with a gentle nudge. The most touching transformation was in their sleeping habits. Though Faith had her own cozy bed, she still preferred to curl up against Hope's chest. But now, instead of the desperate, protective curl of their first days together, their position was one of pure comfort. Hope would wrap herself around Faith with a contented sigh, both of them completely at peace. Eliza often found herself watching them in these quiet moments, marveling at their journey from trauma to trust. Their bond, forged in darkness, had blossomed in the light of safety and love. Hope's embrace of faith was no longer a shield against danger, but a simple expression of unconditional love. In the warm evening light of their new home, surrounded by soft blankets and gentle voices, two once broken spirits had found not just survival, but joy. Their story of protection had become one of family, their fear transformed into unshakable love. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.